So, as you might have seen, President Buhari has hit the campaign trail on behalf of his ruling APC party and its candidate Bola Ahmed Tinubu, starting in Adamawa State and promising to take the president to several other states. But is Mr. Buhari's presence on the hustings likely to be positive or negative for Mr. Tinubu, especially given the widely held view that the APC under President Buhari has been something of a disaster for Nigeria in the past nearly 8 years, not to mention the perception that Mr. Buhari seemed to have dragged his feet and been rather reluctant in coming to the decision to publicly support Mr. Tinubu. And beyond Mr. Tinubu, is Mr. Buhari now thinking more about his legacy and how in the last few months of his administration he can help Nigeria recover from the adversity, the setbacks and the appalling economic mistakes that he's presided over since 2015? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the author, columnist and former member of the House of Representatives, Dr. Dakuku Peterside, who is a chieftain of the ruling APC party, but who I also have to say has been an independent columnist and journalist for quite a few years. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you. Good evening, Charles. And
good evening to you. What sort of impact is President Buhari hitting the campaign trail on behalf of Bola Ahmed Tinubu likely to have?
Well, if you ask me, I would say 4 immediate impacts. The first one is that it dispels the rumor that President Buhari is not in support of his party and the party's presidential candidate. That is now rested. The implication is that the president is in support of the party and its presidential candidate. Now, the second thing, clearly, it is not possible. Buhari has been attributed, or is known that Buhari has in his custody, well, that's not the right word to use, at least 12 million votes. And he did that consistently from 2003, 2007, 2011, 2015. It is not likely that he has lost all 12 million votes. Not likely. Not probable. The implication is that candidate Bola Ahmed Tinubu will benefit from some of those votes. Let's say a fraction of those votes. At minimum, 70% of those votes. That's the implication, and you can't ignore that.
That's an assumption, because
it is an assumption.
Yeah, because the perception seems to be that Mr. Buhari and the APC, of which Mr. Tinubu is an intrinsic part, have failed to deliver on their promises to the Nigerian people, and some have suggested that Mr. Tinubu would do much better if he distances himself from Mr. Buhari. I mean, if you were advising Mr. Tinubu, what would you advise him to do?
Now, I've heard that argument that Tinubu is likely to be held responsible, for some of President Buhari's inactions. Now, if you understand the demographics in the northern part of the country, now you have the urban elite, you have the rural folks. Now, these rural folks don't reason the way the rest of us reason. And they are very fixated in terms of followership. And so, if they see Buhari as the saint they see him, and if Buhari says, I believe that Mr. Tinubu is a good man, they are likely to reason along the same line. You can't ignore that.
That's a very interesting analysis, and that is a reasonable analysis, if I might say so myself. But let's move away from that slightly. I'm sure you've heard of all the attacks on INEC's facilities and so on. INEC is warning that the election could end up being postponed or cancelled because of insecurity. How concerned are you by that, and what would you recommend to get around that? And are you surprised, being a member of the APC is the party in power, trying to hold on to the mandate that was given to President Buhari? Are you surprised that there doesn't appear to be much security around those facilities?
Now, the security challenge is three-pronged. Now, mind you, there is the issue of insecurity across the country, which has nothing to do with the elections. It predated the current government, and the current government has tried to manage it, and the challenge still persists. And it's in all regions of the country. It may be worse in some regions of the country, but it's literally in all regions of the country. And that's the challenge. There are too many ungoverned spaces, and we acknowledge that. And it is part of the challenge that INEC has to deal with in the elections. Now, but the issue of some chaps targeting INEC facilities is of great concern. It's something that should give every Nigerian some very serious concern. But is that sufficient to put off the election or postpone the election? My answer is no.
Well, except saying
except in the context of the general insecurity.
Right, because they're the ones who conduct the election. I mean, they're not saying specifically because of attack on their facilities or whatever, but you have to wonder if given that they've actually come out to say, hey, this could potentially lead to elections being postponed or even cancelled. I mean, that should be a huge concern, yes, particularly for the APC.
That there will be grave consequences. One, there will be a constitutional crisis. Now, the Constitution did not foresee a situation where we can't conduct elections. There's no provision in the Constitution saying when you can't conduct the election, you set up either an interim government. There's no constitutional provision for that. And so what will be the fallback position of both INEC and the government of
yeah, but there's also a constitutional mandate that's imposed on the ruling party to secure the country.
Not just the ruling party, the government of Nigeria.
Yeah.
So no matter the party.
The ruling party being which is the government, I mean, they're the ones who are essentially running the government.
Now, if you look at where we're coming from and where we are today, there's been marginal improvement in security. At some point, we had half of Borno State under the control of
yeah, but that's not really the issue, is it? We've got elections just over a month away, and we need to be sure that you guys have to assure us that we're going to have free and fair elections and secure elections.
I'm reasonably convinced that the country is safe for the conduct of the elections and that there's nothing stopping INEC from conducting the elections. There are isolated cases of security challenges, and I believe that it will be addressed. And I think that the government has stepped up its game in trying to address those security challenges. Well, now, I'm sure you have, if you follow the trend, the president and the National Security Advisor has had multiple layers of engagement with the security agents and even those outside the security circle that has one role or the other to play to ensure that there's enough or adequate security for the conduct of the elections. We actually have no option than to ensure that we fix security so that we conduct elections in this country.
Well, we'll be watching, and the rest of the world will be watching very closely. Let's turn to the field of presidential candidates and the 4 front runners in particular. Is the new political force led by the likes of Peter Obi and Rabiu Kwankwaso getting stronger or weaker as the elections draw near in their challenge of the duopoly of the APC and the PDP?
The first thing is that I have to acknowledge that this is the first time after 1979 that we're having a multi-presidential candidate, a seriously multi-presidential candidate election instead of the binary options that we're used to. Now, if you follow the trend, technically speaking, in 1992-93, Abiola and Tofa, it was a binary election. Then subsequently, in 1999, you had 2 strong candidates, Olufalaye and eventually President Obasanjo. Then subsequently, in 2003, there were 2 strong candidates, 2007, 2011, 2015, 2019. So this is the first time. And so it's in many ways similar to what we had in 1979. And so it makes the election unique. Now this is unique, this is peculiar. I see from my reading of the situation that people are beginning to fall back on their ethnic leanings. The Southeast will predominantly go with Peter Obi. Now, the Southwest will predominantly, that doesn't mean that a number of people in the Southwest will not vote against an Asiwaju, Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Then quite a number of people in the northeast, and I'm specific this time, may likely go with Atiku Abubakar, while some in the northwest will likely go with Kwankwanso. But again, there's been a lot of development that is interesting. If you notice, Afenifere leaders, and you consider them elite of the Yoruba race, a number of them are in support of Peter Obi. You also have a Soludo, who is from the southeast, Prince Atoeze, who is from the southeast, that is also opposed to Peter Obi and in support of candidates from other areas. Then you have Dr. Hakim Baba Ahmed, a northern elite by every consideration, who is opposed to both Atiku and Kwankwaso, and most likely supporting Peter Obi. So the elite, among the elite, there's been serious movement. They're a bit more open, they're a bit more enlightened in their approach to the presidential race. So it makes it difficult to call.
Yes.
That we must also
that's a very interesting and very incisive analysis that you've given. And that is probably because you tend to be, I mean, you're leaning towards your columnist, journalist side as opposed to your kind of political affiliation side. So given that you're doing that, let me ask you to wear your columnist and analyst hat and not your APC cap. What do you think could prove to be the biggest surprise in this election, objectively speaking?
Now, the first is that because of beavers, a lot more people have confidence in the system, and so the turnout will be good.
If security permits.
If security permits, I agree with that. Now, the second consideration is that with beavers, in the past, political leaders will give instruction and people most likely will obey. This time, they will give instructions and people will vote according to their conscience. That's something that will shock most people. So the kind of results that you get will not be in line with what people predict. Now, the other thing is that at the beginning of the current election, electoral process, there was an assumption that the youth, by the way, they have like 48 million registered voters. They constitute the majority bloc in the voting process, that they were tilting to one side. But it's obvious right now that the youth are fragmented, so they're going to vote along different lines. Yes, I agree that the urban youth and the social media youth tend to migrate to a particular direction. But the majority of the youth are fragmented. Some along ethnic lines, some along religious lines, some along, different lines, different leanings. So that's, again, will be a bit surprising. The youth are not going to vote en bloc. Now, if you also follow through, now religious impact is beginning to wane. Unlike before, when Christian leaders will give specific instruction for people to vote A or vote B, people are now beginning to understand that what's key is good governance. Who will deliver good governance? If that coincides with religious leaning, it's a different matter altogether.
That's very interesting.
People are getting more enlightened. People, when they talk about civic enlightenment, people are more enlightened. Now, the economic situation of the country, which is actually global, there's this prediction that, not just prediction, global growth has slowed down. At some point, the prediction by the IMF and World Bank is that global growth will be around 6.2%. Now, in 2001, but by 2002, the global growth had dropped to 2.5%, between 3 and 2.5% growth. Now, the prediction is that in 2023 rather, global growth will slow down to between 1.6 and 2%. So it's a general, it's a global problem.
Yeah, but it's also made worse if your own policies are not supporting growth within your country.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But still wearing your columnist, analyst, journalist hat, which I have to say you're wearing rather well at the moment, do you see this dispute in the PDP? We heard Chuka Odom talking about it earlier. This dispute between Atiku Abubakar and the Nyesom Wike G5 group as hitting Atiku hard, but not necessarily fatally. Or is it likely to scuttle his chances at the ballot box?
It's definitely hitting the PDP hard. You can't ignore the influence of the governors, even when I know they don't determine the direction the voters will go. Like I've always said, voters are a bit more sophisticated, and the days are gone when governors will say go direction A and they go direction A or go direction B. No, that's not obtainable. But some have access to resources. Now, some have political appointees who may go either way. But on the whole, it has weakened, it's a perception thing. It has weakened the chances of the PDP. There's a perception that their house is not united. Now, there's also a perception that this could lead to internal sabotage. It's a challenge that PDP cannot run away from.
Right, okay. Well, we've got about a minute and a half or so left. Very interesting discussion with you. But let me ask you to put back your APC hat, put it back on again. I wonder how optimistic you are about victory for the APC. Do you wake up in the morning and feel sure that the APC will prevail over the PDP, Labour and the NNPP?
Now, I'm happy you asked me to wear my APC hat.
Actually, perhaps I should have asked you not to wear your APC hat. That might have been a little more objective.
The basics are there. I'll just give you 4 parameters. If you look at the number of governors, number of members of National Assembly, obviously, APC has majority. These guys want to remain in government for the right or the wrong reasons. And they will do everything humanly possible. The import of that is that APC has an organized system in place, an organized structure. And in going to any battle, one of the key things both Sun Tzu and other leaders, strategists have told us, is that you can't go to war without a proper organization. It is only a proper organization that can help you deploy your strategy. And so they have that organization. And they have an edge over all the other political parties. Now, again, APC is obviously better resource than all the other political parties. You can't ignore that. Now, if you talk about spread, APC has more spread than all the other political parties. Now, if you talk about experience of going to battle, you can't ignore that. Now, I understand the challenge of creating a perception that, President Buhari has not done well and that APC is likely to suffer some vicarious liability because of the performance of President Buhari. That is expecting too much from Nigerians. I don't think that it's an issue in this election. They know that President Buhari's tenure is technically over. They're talking about the performance of the next government. Buhari is not going to be the man who will sit on the seat and make decisions. So they're looking at the qualities of the candidates, not the performance of a President Buhari. Going forward, now we know that our parties are not ideologically based. And so it's not about the ideology of one party versus the other party. If you ask the ideology of Labour Party, it is not different from the ideology of NNPP or PDP or AP. So the issue is not about ideology. It's rather, we're still in personality race. Now, the issue of manifestos are literally inconsequential. Right. If you follow the trend, our manifestos literally means nothing to the average Nigerian. They don't bother to read it. They don't bother to, only a few elites, which constitutes 0.01%, bother to look at that and even believe that when these candidates get in power, that they will affect whatever is provided for in their manifesto. The ordinary people don't care to know what is your manifesto.
Well, presumably you're one of those who reads it. So
exactly. So it's just
when you talk, you talk from knowledge of these things, and I appreciate very much indeed your sharing some of that knowledge with us today. Dr. Dakuku Peterside is a chieftain of the ruling APC party. He's also an author, columnist, and former member of the House of Representatives. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Charles.